Hello, everyone. Welcome back to How to Be Irish. Of season two, of course, we're in the swing of things now. This episode today is very much going to be an ode to Cork. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of very happy Corkonians tuning in, listening to that. My guest today is Cónal Creedon. I'll introduce Cónal now in a minute. Cónal, though, is very much an epitome of all the great things that Cork has to offer. And he not only lives and has grown up in the city itself, but he brings it to life through all of his work, all of his writing, everything that he has created to date. So I'm very excited to introduce Cónal to you. We're going to be chatting a lot about art, culture, Irish culture, Cork, maybe a few historical things as well. We'll see how we get on. Thank you again for tuning in, and Bear Bua, be me a kaintlat. Cónal Creedon is an award-winning novelist, playwright and documentary filmmaker. His creative practice is inspired what he describes as the spaghetti bowl of streets in downtown Cork City, where Cónal's family has lived and traded for generations. Yet Cónal's diverse body of work is outward-looking and international, featuring translations into Italian, Bulgarian, German and Chinese. Over the past 12 months, his work has achieved immense international recognition. He was awarded the Leonardo da Vinci World Award for Arts 2024 by the World Cultural Council in Switzerland. He received the Irish American Books Award 2024 at the Irish American Heritage Centre. Earlier this year, Cónal was honoured with the Princess Grace Irish Library Award in Monaco, and in July of this year, he was appointed Lake Rockery Gávíle Fisacuig a Phelan na Lake, a septennial celebration of heroes of Irish culture. Cónal's collection of short stories is on record as the most borrowed adult fiction at Cork City Library in 2022. Cónal, thank you so much for coming on to the How to Be Irish
Una,
podcast.
how are you? Thanks for having me. You know, the mad thing is, I like biographies and CV and all that. I always think that my failures have been a lot more spectacular, actually, than my successes. But for some reason, I'm inclined to go to the positive side of it. So thanks for all the kind things you say. But obviously, along the road, there's a lot of stumbles, falls, and also runs as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'd love to get into that. Perhaps I was going to ask you, so
Into all
spaghetti
my
bowl.
failures. We'll start with my intercept results.
I was going to ask you about your most recent book, Spaghetti Bowl. You're talking about the streets of Cork City and how they all intertwine, and you very much grew up in that, and that has shaped you who you are. I would love to hear more about yourself, your life, and how those Spaghetti Bowl of streets has shaped you.
Very briefly, right? I still live in the same street that my grandfather lived in, my father lived in, my grand aunt Julia, and we used to have a little shop here. And I'd say I'm still here, obviously, and I think that has had a huge impact in my whole view of the world, really. Um, I grew up it's a small house. The ground floor was a shop, a small corner shop, and in that small house, when I say it was small because there was so many people in it. So I have 12 brothers and sisters, and my mother, my father, and there'd be a few aunts that would come and stay. And it was sort of an outpost to West Cork, really, because it was called Ginchgilla Dairy. So back in the days before Facebook and telephones and all that kind of carry on, people from that part of the world would gravitate towards this shop to find out about everything from births, deaths, and marriages. It would have been nothing out of the art. Like the Irish language was often spoken at our counter, so I think just being in that melee of people, and I suppose what's sort of half interesting too is that on this street you had a lot of similar shops from different parts of the county. So we were from Inchigeela, you had the O'Sullivans from Beara, you had the Griffins from Kerry, you had the Murphys, all different shops, drawing sort of from their own sort of townlands and parishes. And we were sort of the new Cork, even though we're here 100 years. Back then, we all came in from the country. And I think the previous generation lamented the fact that they felt that they were not of the city. And the mad thing is, I remember around the 1990s, all those small shops, they went one by one by one by one. And me thinking that's the end of an era now, we'll never see that again, and no more kids in the street and all that kind of thing, right? And but suddenly it's changed because once again there's a new wave of Cork, and all those old shops have reopened. But like there's a shop from Bangladesh, a shop from Pakistan, there's a Brazilian shop, there's a Polish shop, and they're actually trading almost the exact same way as we were. Like, so they're all sort of selling much the same kind of things. Maybe the Polish shops might sell more pork than we say the Muslim based shops, but it's still similar. It's selling the same kind of products, right? But there's always an eye on their own little, I suppose, population or homeland or townland or whatever. And I think when I got a glimpse of that happening, it sort of put in context a lot of what we were about, Like, I remember when I was a kid, there was a man over there. His name was Mr. Collin, and I don't know if you know Cork, right? But we're right next to Patrick Street. We're just basically 2 minutes from the main bridge, 2 minutes from Patrick Street, a minute from Patrick Street, really. And he used to call into my father, and he'd open the shop door and he'd shout in and he'd say, "Connie, I'm going into Cork. Do you want anything from Cork?" As in, like, that I'm going into the city. And like he was leaving the countryside, right? And there was that sense, definitely, so I suppose very much engaged with the city, but also a sense of being slightly not of the city. That I think what really probably shaped me from the point of view of writing and storytelling would be the fact that back then things like pubs closed very early. There was no such thing as McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever. So at a certain time in the evening, people would gravitate to any place where there would be a fluorescent light. And our shop was one of those places. There was a few in the city. Our place, Keen's, my cousins had a place over in Ballingeary stores. And they would just gather at the counter. And it could be a whole melee of people, like guards coming off duty, villains, prostitutes, people from dances, lovers, haters, drunks. And people would just hang out there, sitting on the coal bags, and for the most part, just talking. And I think as a kid, I sort of became, not actively, but it sort of, I suppose, subliminally went under my skin that anybody who could tell a story was of value, because anybody who could, and I'm not talking about a big epic, but somebody who would say, I did to town this morning to get a bottle of milk, and you'll never guess. And next thing, the whole place is riveted because some people have a knack of doing that. And maybe I'm only guessing because I've never processed it or thought about it, but maybe I saw the value in that and saw that had a currency all of its own, and on top of financial currency, but it had a value, and I figure that's where my thing comes from. It certainly comes from more spoken word storytelling than literary, because if you grew up in a house with like 20 people and you've only one room and it's behind the shop and the shop is always open and the place is always packed, it's not really the kind of place where you're sitting around having a read on a Saturday morning, It's like, it's full on. My mother used to say it was like Piccadilly Circus. And as a kid, I didn't know what Piccadilly Circus was. I assumed that she was talking about a real circus, like with clowns. And that made total sense to me because there was always stuff going on, There was people just coming and going and, dogs, cats, hedgehogs, whatever was happening. And I figured that that is definitely my way. And in fact, this house here is always full as well. People just call in all the time because it's just the way I sort of, I couldn't see it any other way,
Of course. So very much an observer of what was going on. And I suppose that probably translated into your style of writing then, would you say?
I would think so. No, but see, the only thing is I wouldn't see myself as a natural born writer either. Because, as I say, I wasn't really reading, Now, having said that, I was reading newspapers from the age of around 4. Like, I used to read every news because we sold newspapers, right? And it was a big thing. Like, people would actually come in and ask you, what is the news? Because we didn't have 24-hour rolling news, or people would want to know who won what match or and just being up to speed all the time. But I opened a laundrette here, directly downstairs under this room here, right? Around 1985. And I remember almost immediately realizing that this was something I should not have done, but I borrowed money and stuff. It was during the recession, right? So I was sort of stuck with it. It was like a prison sentence, and I remember being stuck there in my laundrette, looking out, and I started scribbling like notes, and not with any view to publishing or anything, right? Handwritten. I still have a lot of them actually, and I would get them typed. Eventually, when they came together as stories, I got them typed in what was at the time called typing schools. Now they're all gone because people don't learn how to type anymore because of computers, right? But all the typing schools now, interestingly enough, have become language schools, for
Mm.
people from all over the world who come to Cork to learn English or whatever. And but I'd bring up my stories there, and I'd always say it was for somebody else because I'd be a bit embarrassed, right? And I'd put somebody's name on it, right? And then I'd come back and say, was that collected? Sure, look, I'll take it and I'll sort them out. But the mad thing is, I remember one day seeing a note on, or somebody saying it, when I clicked saying, God, I was very sad. And then seeing a note, someone saying, God, you shouldn't have killed him or whatever, right? And there was a realization that somebody was reading these things, right? That they weren't just being typed like by, in these days, a bot or a machine or whatever. It was a human was actually reading them. And I think that was the first time I realized that there was a public, even if it was one person, an audience of one, and it really upped my game. I remember I had a story the same day to hand in, and I wouldn't bring it in because I thought this needs to be fixed if someone's going to read it. And the mad thing is, I often thought, I was telling students this story about 2 weeks ago, and I thought, am I making this up? Like, is this just me sort of mythologizing my own past and stuff, And that very night, I was at a poetry reading, and one of the students reading said, "Come here, my mother's here, you should meet her, right?" And I met her mother, and her mother said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No, I don't." She said, "I worked in the Lee typing school and used to bring in our story." And I said, "So it's true?" And she says, "Yeah, so it is true." And yeah, so that's how I started writing, really, sort of more, I suppose, frustration with the laundrette, and then that just became obsessional, really. And it's now the only thing I really care about personally, right? Obviously I care about people, and I care about like what I cook for dinner, and I care about my little dog and all those things, right? But from the point of view of if for me to be happiest in the world, it's to be sitting alone and writing, and
Mm.
that's what I like. That's, people sometimes talk about, you mentioned CV and stuff earlier, biography and all that. Like, for me, the only success really is to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I didn't realize that you'd only like been writing, I suppose, more recently. You mentioned it was around the recession time, but you were making documentaries before that, right?
Yeah, but see, that was the second last recession. That was the recession 1984. It's a long time ago. 1984 is like almost 50 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, so yeah, but that's when I started writing. Yeah, then I just keep following things, right? The mad thing is that because I've no great ambition to publish, that's the truth of it. I've no great ambition to even engage with the industry of writing or whatever. I just want to write, and that takes different forms. So with the documentaries, that's sort of how that happened. I found a story that interested me, and then I sort of went down that rabbit hole, and I had all this information. So I said, you know what, this is visual, really, and people need to know about it. So, so the first one would have been the burning of Cork, it's sort of, 1920, 21, that kind of stuff.
I hadn't heard of the burning of Cork beforehand. I looked into it after realizing that you'd made a documentary on it, and I was kind of shocked that this wasn't taught in schools.
Well, the mad thing is, truthfully, and this isn't me claiming anything, right? It's because the story was there to be told, but nobody had actually heard of it. And now, at the moment, it has taken very big precedence over. For example, you'll see in City Hall websites quotations from Terence McSweeney and Tomas McCurtain, and but there was no awareness of it. And in fact, when I was researching it back, this was 2005. When I was researching it, there was no mention of any history books, and I remember finding it in one history book, but they had the wrong year. They just so they were saying, and then there was this event in Cork in 1920 or 21. They were saying it was 20. It happened, right? And how I got into it actually was I started visiting first of all the elderly people around here, and they had traced memories of that time. And then I started going to places like share buildings where elderly people live and stuff, and nursing homes, and just a tail end of people being able to remember, because they were the oldest people. Old is the wrong word, but they were the most senior people in like around at that time. So there would have been people in their 90s kind of stuff who would have been just sort of, yeah, I remember. And then I just decided to go through the newspapers. And the mad thing about researching something like that in newspapers is when you know that on this date the city erupted and they burnt the place to the ground, right? And they burnt the city hall, and they burnt all of Patrick Street, and they burnt up by, and you know this is going to happen, and you're reading the newspapers, and it's a bit like that film Back to the Future, that I know what's going to happen. Nobody, so you're reading the week beforehand, and the newspapers are saying things are really hotting up here, but blah 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 is coming together, and then you hear, oh, Terence McSweeney has been arrested. Terence McSweeney is now on hunger strike, and you can see why this is happening. And then suddenly it happens, and you almost feel like, I know, being a time traveler and shouting back through the centuries to the century, like, guys, can you not see what's going to happen? Just can everybody
Mm.
just calm down? And it's, I guess, very similar to present day events that, I think most of us have an idea that, if something bad is going to happen, and yet we sort of amble along blindly into it, and
Mm.
so that Burning a Cock documentary was very important for me, because it engaged me right to the street and all that kind of stuff.
And was the Burning of Cork documentary, perhaps you give a little bit more context about the event itself, how it came about, and your own thoughts on why you think this isn't really a known thing or is written about in history
Well,
books?
it's very well known now, because I mean, we even, like, in that there's been the decade of centenaries, which is 10 years of from 1913 to 1923. That's the, I suppose, just the beginning of uh, First World War right through to the end of the Civil War, and that decade has just been celebrated. I mean, COVID actually maybe cut back a lot of the celebration, or the commemorations, actually is the word they use. Um, but they would have screened the documentary, on City Hall and that kind of stuff. And particularly in Cork, it'd be very well known now. But yeah, well, the lead up to it was very straightforward. It basically, the War of Independence was getting out of hand. Within a very short sequence, there was two or three events that happened that just catapulted the whole thing into this chaos. One would be the arrival of what became known as the Black and Tans, but they were auxiliaries. They were a police force, an auxiliary police force, who sort of were a law unto themselves. That was sort of followed up very quickly by a very sort of big ambush in Kilmichael that Tom Barry was involved in, and there was a big ambush there where they killed a lot of these auxiliaries. And then I suppose the third big thing would be the death of, well, first of all, the shooting dead of the Lord Mayor, Tomás McCurtain, in his home, just lives out the road there, right? Just out in Blackpool there. In front of his wife and children and things, right? And I think he may have been a man who might have had an awful lot to offer. He definitely was a man who had a lot to offer from the point of view of being intellectual and being intelligent and all that. Like, it wasn't just hellfire and brimstone. And then the man who succeeded him was a man called Terence McSweeney, and he was dead within 6 months, hunger strike. And I think at that point the place was ready to go. And then you had a few ambushes and a few reprisals, and that it led to the big night, to the event.
Drawing back a little bit more on what you spoke about earlier, you mentioned a few different things of you were saying about the different types of shops that are around where you live now compared to the shops back then where people used to come and gather and such. Do you see many similarities or differences or perhaps recurrences of history or of the way people are between then and now in Cork in Ireland?
The funny thing is that certainly back then, and I don't really see the world in that big frame, because I'm very much living in the present. I don't really think that much about, the progress of things as they go on. But Uh, One thing I will say is certainly when I was growing up, it was very monocultural, right? So you wouldn't see people of different cultures around the place at all. Very rare, very rarely. And you certainly wouldn't see their cultural practices. So I think that's, for me anyway, it's a really good and positive thing, because I think when you live in an island like Ireland, it can become like the Galapagos if you're not careful, right? We just become this species that's almost extinct. Um, and I think it's so important to have people just coming through with ideas and thoughts. And I think sometimes people forget. And I think there might be a generation who probably aren't old enough to remember how grey things were really, during the monocultural times at a time. And it's hard to imagine it now, but not so long ago, as in my lifetime, there was only one television channel and it was only on a few hours a day, and it came from Dublin and it was a government channel, right? So, like, the big buzzword now is fake news, but back then everything was seen through the filter of government, and everything the government filtered was through the eyes of the Catholic Church,
Mm.
and that's the way things were, and where we are now is a progress. Progress doesn't necessarily mean positive, but it's that development from that to where we are, and I think that's the journey we're all on, and we're never going to reach the end of the journey. Hopefully, the journey is going to keep changing, and that's the beauty of it. But right now, I must say, I love the way it is at the moment. In that, I love the different cultures in the street. I love the engagement about. I meet people on the street all the time about food and that kind of stuff. But the fact that media is so open, because it was very closed. And, sometimes people give out about social media and all that. And I think it's brilliant because it basically is a form of democracy that wasn't there before. That,
Hmm.
if you see a play tonight and you like it, you can go onto your Instagram or your Facebook and say, I saw a play tonight and it was brilliant. Well, a few years ago, the only way that voice would get out would be if you wrote for a newspaper, and if your editor thought that what you had to say was of value. So it limits down to two people what now a million people can do, and I like the way things are, and I wish there was more of it, to tell you the truth.
It's nice to hear a different view on social media. I feel like we've always got negative things to say about it as of late. But another one of your documentaries, if it's spiced beef. Now, I've had the pleasure of trying spiced beef at Christmas, but I'm from Limerick myself, Conal. So,
What? Oh, I thought you were
yeah.
from Cork.
No, I'm from
Lord.
Limerick. I'm from spiced beef. So I think vast majority of people around the country have absolutely probably no idea what this is. So you created this documentary. It's all about Cork at Christmas, but the key thing being about spiced beef. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about it and more about that
Okay.
documentary as well?
Well, very briefly, like, I suppose I have a big thing that I live downtown, and I when I wander in town and I go into shops just chatting to people, right? Because I see them like neighbors, really. And uh, that documentary was made, God, would it be almost 15 years ago, I suppose, right? And at the time, there were a few shops that I used to call into all the time. For example, I don't know if you saw the documentary, the toy shop up in Shandon Street. She's brilliant. But God, she passed away since, right? But a real small toy shop. There's the Sweet Factory, Linehan Sweet Factory. They make bullseyes. Tony Linehan, Danny. I feel almost like part of their family, actually. And they're just down the street there and up by Shandon. And also the O'Flynn's, who are actually got out of business, well, not gone out, but they've closed down since, right? And they would have been famous for spiced beef. Now, spiced beef is very big in Cork, not just the O'Flynn's, but uh, a lot of different butchers make their own spiced beef, and people will tell you different reasons why we have it. I really don't know, but what I think there's a few different reasons. I think one reason is that bacon was a big thing here, right? And around 100 years ago, there was a whole influx of basically Lithuanian Jewish people, right? There's an area town called Jewtown. It's over by the city hall there, right? Where they would have, first of all, I suppose, established themselves, right? And I think, first of all, they would not have been eating pork the way we were, right? And I got a feeling that maybe I got it. Maybe I'm wrong, right? But the spices were sort of so exotic that it may have come from there. Them sort of deciding let's do this instead of pork, right? Uh, Other people say it was a way of preserving meat because uh, Cork was a big port. It was a massive port actually in its day, right? And like so selling stuff to what was the I suppose the British Empire really, because we would have been part of the British Empire, and the beef wouldn't be sold live; it would be butchered and sent. And so what you find is there are two sort of major. Uh, so spiced beef is one of them. The other one then is offal. So offal is the offcut, the stuff that wasn't going out in the boats, right? And I suppose the stuff going out in the boats would have been cured with things like, juniper berries and all that kind of stuff. And I'm only guessing that maybe that's where that came from. Meanwhile, offal like pig's head, crew beans, pig's tail, bodice, tripe, all that kind of stuff, because you couldn't export that because that's soft tissue and stuff. Um, was being eaten here because you could get it more or less free, really. There was so much of it around.
So spiced beef, people would have it alongside their turkey, their ham, etc. It's kind of like an additional thing.
It's a big thing here, yeah, it really is. And no, the only thing is, it used to be just Christmas time, but
Yeah,
now it's all year round. It's like, um, but there are certain places like the Long Valley, they do a spiced beef sandwich. It's a bar, right? And I think
lovely.
that's a real sign that Christmas is here, the spiced beef sandwich in the valley. Um, but yeah, all the shops, all the butcher shops do it all year round now because it's become a bit of a staple, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very nice. Would recommend it to anyone to try it if they ever get the opportunity.
Oh, it's incredible. It really is. And I don't know, it's clove is sort of the main taste. Clove, juniperberry. It's very sort of I suppose exotic and sweet. It's not beefy. Cinnamon, juniper berries, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's got this sort of dusty outside, and it's quite special. The trick really
Yeah,
is to cook it slow and for a long time. So and then you cut it very thinly, whereas ham is usually cut very thick. But anyway, that's it.
lovely. I want to try that sandwich you mentioned. Speaking of, what are some of your favourite spots around Cork?
Town at the moment is going through a bit of a golden age, I think, and it goes through phases. And like there was a time when there wasn't a lot going on, and well, particularly because of licensing laws. But I think for music, definitely you don't really have to leave this street because next door you have the Sinead, it's a big trad music place, and then next door to that you have the Corner House, which is also like epic from the point of view of trad music. If it's bars we're talking about, then you head into town. Benny McCabe has a bunch of brilliant bars, so places like the Mutton Lane, the Poor Relation, all those places. The High B, of course, is one of these, another sort of very unique bar. It's an upstairs bar and has sort of a massive tradition there and culture. It's just one room upstairs. It's like someone's living room. But then across the road from it, you have the Long Valley, which is another sort of very important traditional bar. But at the moment, this stretch of street here and McCurtain Street has taken on a life of its own. It used to be maybe 10 years ago sort of kebab shops and taxi stands. And now it's turned into very much sort of wine bars, cocktail bars, good restaurants, Isaac's. It's interesting actually because if you look at the city, on the other side of the city, like Washington Street, will be mainly where sort of students go, and there's a good crop of bars there too, right? But it keeps the two sort of I suppose demographics sort of separated, which is probably a good thing, right? It's probably more my age up here and definitely more studenty over there. And at the moment, town Cork is a good place to be, I think.
I wouldn't expect anything else from a Corkonian like yourself. The
Well,
the old saying of you being obsessed with it. What do you think of that?
well, the mad thing is probably true, but the thing is that I don't know. See, I don't have children or whatever, and if I had, I would then be stuck here, right? But I don't, and I'm free to leave any time, right? And that's an amazing testament to a place that you're free to leave and you don't go. I did live away for a while. I lived in Canada for about 5 years, and that was great. But when I came home, I was sort of, I think I saw the place with the eyes with new eyes, you know. It was sort of, I saw the magic of the place. I think when I left, I was sort of glad to go. But coming back, you sort of become, I won't say a tourist in your own place, but you
Mm.
definitely see it through a different lens. And did you go to college in Limerick or did you leave or?
No, I went to Dublin and I've lived in Spain as well and traveled a good bit. So I very much know that feeling that you're talking about. I'm back in Dublin now. So yeah, I get
And
that
you,
idea. You're a tourist in your own city in a way.
yeah, and you see things that are of value that would have went over your head before. You say, God, that's special,
Absolutely.
actually. Because I must say, there's this. Yeah, I think that's the big thing. You come back, and I think it's a small bit like Tir na nog, you know. It's like
Mm.
if you get off the horse when you come back from Spain, right? If you stayed for 2 weeks, you go back to Spain, everything will be fine, right? But once you get off the horse, you end up staying here, and that's what happened to me. I was half tempted to go back a few times, but then you start setting down roots, and it becomes the place, you know.
That absolutely happens. Like the idea of people come back or they get a new job or they start a new relationship or whatever it is, and somehow you get pulled back into it, and it's much harder to leave once again. Just to go back to your writing a little bit, Conal, if that's all right. Your books have been translated, as I said in the opening, into many different languages, and your writing is very outward looking, as I said, it appeals to an international audience. Do you think there's something about being Irish or being from Cork that helps you to do that?
Uh, Not particularly, because I have a funny relationship with being Irish, because I sometimes think that's an exclusive kind of, so rather than being a description. So, for example, put it this way, I think words like Irish, English, French, Chinese, American, black, white, Catholic, Protestant, I think they're just to help people identify rather than a statement of what I am, you know? I think nationalism is a funny thing that I'm even though I suppose politically I would be what's considered a nationalist, I would see myself as being very much into what I would call culturalism, if that's a term, whereby, like on this street, you can celebrate your Irishness, and next door, they can celebrate their being from Pakistan. And in fact, the thing about culturalism is that you can celebrate it without aggression, and I think that's sort of where I am really. The whole thing of why the stuff works abroad, I've no idea. Like, I brought this one here. Well, yeah, this one here, Passion Player, right? It's oh, actually, I'll show you something if you don't mind. I
Go
I
for it,
brought this
yeah.
photograph. I don't know if you can see this, right?
Yeah, I can
But
see it, yep.
that photograph, right? So this guy and this guy, the two of them are brothers, and the
Uh-huh.
rest of them are their children, right? And that's me on my dad's knee. So, like, there was a lot of us there,
Oh my
but
God.
but so, like, this little book is it's a mad thing, right? Because it's about bedsit land, but it's not intentionally about bedsit land. It happened to be written around that time, people living in bedsits, and the book begins with the main character taking his own life, but he also takes 2 hits of LSD, and ultimately, while he's dead on the floor, his mind goes on a journey and brings him right back to where he started. And where he started is looking at the north side of Cork City. And the point being that this is the place that drove him to take his life, and yet this is
Hmm.
the place that is now heaven, because he realizes he's at the gates of heaven. And I think asked about what Cork means to me and all that, and I think that is the essence of it. It's like anywhere else; it has its ups and its downs, and its ins and its outs, and its happies and sads. But it's unless you have that dichotomy, you really don't have much. I think it's important to have the good with the bad, because otherwise you've nothing to rate the good against. And the same with happy and sad. If you go through life just smiling all the time, it gets a bit moronic, So realistically, I think sometimes you do need the hot and the cold to sort of to realize where you have. I tell you, I mad thing is I brought a bunch of my plays to China, right? And that was interesting because my plays are very much set on this street, and they're set on around here. And I just thought, I remember at one point asking somebody in Dublin would they be interested, and they said that Dublin people wouldn't get the Cork thing. And I was sort of happy to accept that. And then the next thing, somebody in New York said, "Can I put it on?" And I said, "Yeah, but you mightn't get it because they won't get it in Dublin." And they put it on, and it did really well. It won a bunch of awards, and they've been on there every year now since the last 10 years, I suppose, right? Uh, and similarly, I happened to be in China at that time, and they saw the New York Times review, and they said, "Oh, you're the guy." I said, "Bring it over here." And the same thing, I said, "You probably won't get it because they won't get it in Dublin, right?" And and brought it over, and it got the best play of the year in Shanghai that year, right?
Wow.
Um, so I think realistically, the more what I'm getting at is that it's about human nature. And I think if somebody is cooking spiced beef, or if they're cooking, noodles, or if they're cooking Paulo Romano, it doesn't matter. People know what cooking is, and they're gathering. And that's where I've been lucky, that the stuff that's very parochial in one way has been accepted as being global by other people. And that's been a
Mm.
huge, in a way, a confidence builder for me, because I'm never, when you're writing, you always think, this is rubbish. And then you just keep going because you're enjoying the process. And then when somebody, a third party, comes back and gives you the thumbs up or whatever, it sort of keeps it going.
Absolutely. So Cork is closer to China than it is to Dublin.
Well, I wouldn't be saying that too loud. Well, I still haven't had a play on in Dublin, but I've had about five on in China,
My
and
God.
certainly about five or six or more on in New York. But that's just
Wow.
that's the way the cookie crumbles. Yeah.
Exactly, that's it. Just in the interest of time, Conal, I might take us to our final question, and I suppose
Oh
the
Lord.
question as to why this podcast exists. For you, what does it mean to be Irish?
Okay, well, I suppose realistically, because I lived abroad for so long, our first sort of section, I'm aware of what it's like to be, for the want of a better word, like somebody not of a place and yet being in a place. And even though I've always had very kind and friendly interactions when I was abroad, um, I'm still aware of that sense of being away from home, away from your culture, and people maybe not instinctively understanding what you're saying. Whereas you may have found it yourself, when you come home, there's almost a relief of, I don't have to explain anything anymore. People know what I'm talking about. Not just
Yeah.
the accent, it's just the mindset. You can just say something in one word, and it'll cover everything to somebody who's been through a similar experience. So that's the first thing, being aware. The second thing is that I really not a great fan of boundaries. I think they're a man-made thing. I think they're human-made, and I think they're very crippling. I think they're bad for ideas. I think they're bad for culture. They're like, it's a relatively new thing in the realm of humanity, that suddenly people are drawing lines and maps and saying, "Oh, you can't go here and you can't go there." That is very new. It's only a few hundred years old, right? Really, considering that we're here all this, so long, and I personally, I find it a very negative thing. And um, I think you should be able to get on your bicycle and cycle from Cork to Beijing, if you could cycle underwater, right? But no, but you could cycle across Europe, and or from here to South Africa or wherever you wanted to go, right? Without anybody ever asking you, where are you going or who are you. I think it's it's a crazy thing, this ownership. The monarch butterfly, interesting, right? They fly from Canada down to the end of South America every year, and it takes them, I think, for one whole journey, right? It takes something like a year and a half, right? And in that time, there are 9 generations born and die, and they get there, and then they do it back up again, right? So in between those two journeys, there's 18 generations that never reach where they're going, and
Hmm.
nobody ever stops them once to ask them where they're going. What's your name? Can I see a piece of paper? And when they arrive in South America, the South Americans are so delighted to see them, and they arrive back up to Canada. The Canadians are delighted to see them, and yet we can't do that with people. And I find that a bit tragic. I find it really tragic. I find the more people I meet, the more I find humanity is actually a great thing. And I just sometimes find that how sometimes very small sections can hold so much sway over what kindness exists is not a good thing. So from the point of view of being Irish, I think culture is really important. But I think culture is changing all the time, and it's important to embrace the change. So, I mean, Irish culture at the moment is everything from it. This isn't all about uilleann pipes and fiddles, Like, Irish culture is about how we're going with food, how we're going with language, how we're going with technology. All that's very much our culture, right? And call it Irish, call it whatever you want, but it's a microcosm of the world that's happening around us. And
Mhm.
meanwhile, up the street or across the road or even the island next to us, they are sort of developing in a similar kind of way. And it's to be celebrated rather than to be, you know, I think
Mhm.
the competition is a good thing, but competition as an Olympic competition, like as in like applaud when somebody else wins rather than attacking when somebody else wins. If that's what it means to be Irish, absolutely. Open the doors, let people in. That's what I feel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cónal. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Listen, Una, thank you very much. And huge
You're so
honour and a
welcome.
lovely way to spend a Thursday afternoon. And
Likewise.
yeah, if ever
Thank you
you're
so
up in
much.
Cork, give me a shout.